So, we've all been there, right? You're in a yoga class and the instructor says, take a deep yoga breath. We just do it. But what if I told you that the history of that very breath is way more complex, way more surprising, and honestly, way more global than you could ever imagine?
Okay, so everything we're about to dive into comes from some really incredible research by a scholar named Lena Kra. She wrote a book called Yoga Breath and talked all about it on the Ancient Futures podcast with Daniel Simpson. And trust me, her work completely pulls back the curtain on how our modern breathing practices were actually created.
It really begs the question, doesn't it? When you're on your mat doing what you assume is this super ancient yoga breathing, where did those techniques actually come from? Well, the answer, it's this wild mix of East and West, old and new. And it tells us so much about how yoga itself became what it is today.
All right, so to really get this, we've got to rewind. Let's go all the way back to the beginning. What did the word pranayama even mean in the first place, in the classical yoga tradition?
Okay, get this. In the classic Hatha Yoga texts, pranayama basically meant one thing, and one thing only, kumbhaka. The word in Sanskrit means something like pot-like, and it's all about filling up your lungs and then just holding it. Yeah, that's it. It wasn't about these long, flowing inhales and exhales we all think of.
And Lena Kra, the scholar we mentioned, makes this super clear. She points to key texts like the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, and in it, the definition is so specific, it's all about breath retention. That whole rhythmic, flowing breath that's so central to modern yoga, it just wasn't the main event back then. Not at all.
So if the original practice was all about holding your breath, where on earth did we get our modern ideas about deep, rhythmic breathing? Well, it turns out it all comes down to this really pivotal period of, let's call it a modern reinvention. We're talking about a very specific window of time, roughly 1850 to 1945. This is the era that Lena Kra's research pinpoints as the most important. It's when what we call yogic breath today was basically created, born out of this huge global mashup of ideas. It was just a massive, massive shift. You had this very specific traditional pranayama, and it morphed into something Kra calls yogic breath cultivation. Think of it like this. The original practice was a small box, and suddenly it became this giant container, ready to be filled up with all sorts of new ideas, like deep and rhythmic breathing that actually came from places you would never expect. And this, right here, is where the story gets really wild. Because a lot of these new ideas, the ones that are now at the heart of modern yoga breathing, they didn't come from ancient India. Nope, they came from the West. I mean, the mix of influences is just mind-blowing. You've got stuff starting way back in the 1780s with mesmerism and its theories about cosmic fluids. Fast forward a bit, and in the 1860s, a French singing coach is teaching actors how to breathe. Then, the Theosophical Society comes along and starts blending Eastern and Western mysticism. And it all kind of comes to a head in 1892 when an American woman, Genevieve Stebbins, publishes this game-changing book on what she called dynamic breathing. So who were these people, really? Well, you had Francois Delsarte. He was basically a vocal coach for performers, teaching them to breathe from their diaphragm. Then there's Genevieve Stebbins. She took his techniques, mixed them with some occult ideas, and get this, she's the one who first came up with the term rhythmic breathing. And the Theosophists, they were these Western spiritualists who literally moved to India and just started mixing it all together, even calling yoga self-mesmerization. It's incredible. But it wasn't just the techniques themselves that were changing. The words were changing too. The whole ancient idea of prana, life force, it got a major makeover. It was strategically repackaged to sound good to a modern world that was becoming really interested in science. It was totally a conscious rebranding. You had gurus like Swami Vivekananda trying to introduce yoga to the West. So to make prana seem less, mystical, he started comparing it to things like electricity and magnetism. Then another teacher, Yogendra, called it bioenergy, which sounds very scientific. And Paramahansa Yogananda took it a step further and called them lifetrons. It was all a really smart way to make these ancient ideas feel fresh and relevant to a whole new audience. And this is where we get that phrase we've all heard a million times, the idea of recharging your battery with prana. That analogy? It's not ancient, not even close. It comes straight out of this period, from Western spiritual groups who were using the language of brand new technology, like batteries, to explain these big cosmic ideas.
So, okay, what's the takeaway here? What does all this mean? Well, it means that the yoga breathing that you and I do in class, it isn't some pure, unbroken tradition that goes back thousands and thousands of years. Instead, it's this incredibly rich, complex hybrid. It's a mashup of ancient Indian philosophy, yes, but also 19th century Western acting techniques, some mystical ideas, and even early scientific jargon. And you know what? That doesn't make it any less real or authentic. It just shows us that it has this amazing, fascinating, and truly global history. So, I guess that leaves us with one final thought. The next time you're on your mat, knowing that your yoga breath has this hidden history, with threads leading back to French singers and American mystics, does that change how you think about taking that next deep breath?